an agenda. I sometimes go to the studio and write on the floor, you know.
They nicknamed him Slowhand, but Clapton's fuse was anything but long. Beyond his fluid solos and unforgettable melodies, there was a man infamous for revolutionizing blues rock and locking horns with some of music's most iconic figures. These weren't just minor disputes. These were brutal collisions of personality and pride. Driven by envy, wounded egos, broken trust, and sometimes raw hatred, Clapton's rivalries left marks on rock history. From romantic betrayals to verbal jabs and backstage chaos, Clapton's quiet rage hummed beneath the surface of the genre's golden age. Many say his guitar growled louder as the conflict around him deepened. And the spark that ignited the first major fire? A studio showdown with none other than Phil Collins. Known for his polished pop wizardry, Collins entered Clapton's world like an unwelcome storm. Eric had zero ambition to become a glossy pop sensation. He was built for the grit of the blues, nothing less. But as the synth-heavy sheen of the 1980s took over, Collins attempted to modernize Clapton's sound, nearly tearing it apart. To the outside world, their team-up looked like a recipe for greatness. At the peak of his fame, Collins, already soaring from Genesis and solo fame, signed on to produce Clapton's Behind the Sun in 1985. He played drums on several tracks, giving the album that signature studio finesse. For the suits at the label, it was the perfect commercial pairing. To Clapton, though, it felt like an attack on everything he stood for. The crisp keyboards, slick mixes, and shiny production clashed with the music in his blood. He didn't recognize the sound or the man behind the microphone. Alone in private, Clapton vented, telling a confidant, "They're turning me into something I'm not, and never wanted to be." Things only grew more strained from there. Collins, always chasing the next chart topper, pushed for pop-friendly hooks and cleaner structure. Clapton, holding tightly to his blues heritage, fought back with everything he had. In the studio, they clashed constantly over what direction the album should take. Collins argued for mainstream success, while Clapton felt like he was betraying himself. Then came the global spectacle of Live Aid in 1985, and tensions boiled over. The world saw them smiling and playing in harmony on stage. But insiders say they were locked in a fierce debate just hours before the show. Clapton lobbied for raw, heartfelt blues numbers to honor his roots. Collins stood firm on flashy, crowd-pleasing hits for the massive TV audience. Clapton later admitted the pressure to conform nearly crushed him. In hindsight, he labeled that period the moment he traded authenticity for airplay. As Collins continued climbing the pop charts, Clapton faded from public view. He needed space, so he pulled away to reconnect with the gritty blues sound that first gave him life. Their personal bond never really mended after that. The press tore the album apart for sounding overproduced and artificial. Die-hard fans and blues purists said Clapton had abandoned the very soul of his music. The whole ordeal left a lingering bitterness Clapton never quite shook off. But if you think his musical identity crisis was rough, it pales next to the chaos that erupted when he joined forces with someone who made his skin crawl. Enter Ginger Baker, the wild, explosive drummer with whom Clapton had an uneasy rhythm. Together, Clapton and Baker created undeniable energy in their live performances. But off-stage, their partnership was a ticking time bomb. They made up 2/3 of Cream, one of rock's earliest and most volatile supergroups. Back in the late 60s, they unleashed a sound that would become the thunderous heartbeat of rock, loud, raw, and electric. Their shows didn't just light up the stage, they lit fuses, because behind the amplifiers were clashing personalities waiting to explode. At the root of it all was a relationship that started off rocky and only got worse. Clapton respected Baker's skills, but detested the man behind the drums. Meanwhile, Baker saw Clapton not as a peer, but as someone too soft, too ready to sell out, too willing to compromise. As tensions boiled, Clapton confided before a major show, "It's either him or me," and he meant every word of it. Things deteriorated so badly that when Cream hit the road for their final tour in 1968, it was more like a pressure cooker than a farewell celebration. They couldn't share a studio without the threat of a blow-up, so sessions were split between locations to avoid a full-blown brawl. Even live on stage, you could sense the friction. Their eyes locked in cold stares mid-song, and between tracks, not a word was spoken. Yet, despite the Cold War atmosphere, the band kept pushing through the chaos. playing as if their lives depended on it. In a strange twist, the very hatred they held may have sparked the fire behind tracks like Sunshine of Your Love and White Room, songs electrified by animosity. But once Cream split, Clapton had zero desire to ever cross paths with Baker again. He was done. Though fans dreamed of a full-scale reunion, Clapton shot the idea down time and again when Baker's name came up. Privately, he spoke of Baker as volatile and exhausting, a man he called a nightmare behind closed doors. When they finally did reunite briefly in 2005, it was all business. No jokes, no brotherhood, just two icons performing out of obligation. Afterward, Baker didn't hold back, claiming, "Eric was scared of me. He knew who the better musician was." Clapton never clapped back in public, but insiders said the remark only widened the rift that had never really closed. What they created together became historic. But the bond between them was scorched beyond repair. Just when you thought the tension couldn't get any sharper, Clapton ran headfirst into someone who didn't just oppose him. He ridiculed his entire identity. Enter Frank Zappa, a man who didn't just break musical rules, he stomped on them with glee. While Clapton stood for blues tradition, Zappa came barreling in like a wrecking ball to tear it all down. Zappa embraced chaos, innovation, and absurdity. He wasn't just odd, he was proudly rebellious. To Zappa, Clapton's style wasn't sacred, it was stale, and he made no effort to hide it. In a brutal 1978 interview, Zappa went for the jugular. "Eric Clapton plays it safe. There's no edge, no risk, no soul." That wasn't just a critique, it was a gut punch, a direct attack on everything Clapton held dear. Already sensitive to whispers about being past his prime, Clapton lashed out in private, telling a friend, "Zappa's music is just ego screaming over garbage. None of it matters." But this wasn't a sudden blow-up. Their feud had been slowly simmering since they first crossed paths back in 1969 at the Love and Peace Festival. Word had it that Zappa insisted on taking the stage just before Clapton, aware that his unpredictable and chaotic performance would be nearly impossible to top. Grinning as he gave instructions, Zappa reportedly told the crew, "Let's see if he can handle following that." While Clapton didn't lash out in public, his anger boiled beneath the surface in private. In his view, Zappa wasn't breaking musical boundaries, he was just an attention-seeking jester with a guitar. To Clapton, Zappa's art wasn't revolutionary, it was nonsense, dressed up as innovation. But Zappa didn't hold back. During interviews, he openly mocked Clapton's solos as tired pentatonic routines. He even hinted that Clapton hadn't played anything fresh in over 10 years. Clapton clapped back quietly, calling Zappa's music unbearable and claiming none of his musical heroes liked it. Still, beyond the public snipes, something much deeper divided them. Where Clapton stood for blues roots, emotional grit, and tradition, Zappa stood for upheaval, deconstruction, and experimental reinvention. Their clash went far beyond ego. It symbolized rock's split between its origins and its evolution. Even long after Zappa passed away in 1993, Clapton didn't soften his stance. He allegedly confided to a friend, "There's nothing I could say about him that wouldn't be out of line." And just like that, their icy rivalry never found warmth, not even in memory. But if Zappa's provocations stung, the next chapter tore through Clapton's private world with devastating force. This time, it was Keith Richards who stepped into the frame, a betrayal that hit Clapton like a poison in the blood. What unfolded had it all: drugs, pride, and a woman who detonated a bond beyond repair. While Clapton and Richards were never best friends, things exploded when Clapton crossed a sacred line. He went after, and eventually won over, Pattie Boyd, George Harrison's wife. To Richards, this wasn't just bad behavior, it was the ultimate act of disloyalty. Calling him out in public, Keith slammed Clapton's move as low and dishonorable. This wasn't only about love, it was about brotherhood, trust, and an unwritten code among rock royalty. And from Richards' perspective, Clapton had shattered that code without regret. On the musical side, their friction only grew stronger. Clapton, who prized technical blues precision, saw Keith's guitar work as rough and unrefined. He supposedly dismissed Richards' playing as careless, lazy, and lacking discipline. Keith didn't hold back either. He trashed Clapton in interviews as dull, formulaic, and completely overhyped. Then came the drugs, and with them, deeper rifts. Both men spiraled into addiction during the 1970s, but instead of supporting each other, they clashed. Richards reportedly accused Clapton of using heroin to avoid facing reality. "He hides behind his habits," Keith allegedly told someone in their circle. Clapton, not known for letting insults slide, fired back with venom. "Keith's been playing the same handful of riffs for 2 decades, he reportedly scoffed. Their shared friends found themselves in a no-win situation. At one point, parties were divided. Half invited Clapton, half invited Richards. Even festival organizers began making quiet arrangements to avoid putting them on the same bill. This wasn't just rivalry, it had turned into open hostility. More than personal drama, the feud exposed a deeper resentment. To Keith, Clapton had lost his edge, too clean, too scripted. And to Clapton, Richards was a wreck, too reckless, too messy, and vastly overrated. The hostility between them wasn't just professional. It cut bone deep and lasted for years, driven by bruised egos and a sense of betrayal. These weren't just two artists clashing, they were titans trapped in a cold, quiet war that never truly ended. If their animosity came from wounded pride and shattered trust, what came next dug into something even more corrosive, the raw dread of being forgotten. Jimmy Page was the rival Clapton never quite defeated, the ghost of a crown lost forever. Clapton had once been untouchable in the UK, a guitar messiah praised by both spray paint and screaming fans. But everything shifted when a shadowy figure emerged, not just to challenge the throne, but to obliterate it. Jimmy Page arrived with swagger, sorcery, and sounds that bent the laws of music itself. He didn't just play guitar, he conjured storms with a bow and strings. Led Zeppelin wasn't a band in the traditional sense. It was a seismic event in music history. Clapton, once the standard, started to seem like a relic in a rapidly evolving world. As Zeppelin conquered charts and continents, Clapton's private frustrations reached a slow boil. A studio tech recalled Eric scoffing mid-session, claiming, "Jimmy relies on studio magic. He couldn't do that live." But Jimmy did do it live, louder, wilder, and with godlike control. While Zeppelin became legends, Clapton reportedly avoided any comparison between the two. He already knew the uncomfortable truth. The torch had been passed, and it wasn't coming back. Paul Samwell Smith, who knew them both from the Yardbirds, laid it bare. Jimmy made great the band Eric walked away from. That bitter truth stayed with Clapton, a wound that festered behind his calm persona. Even in later interviews, he took jabs at Page, saying his sound was slick but soulless. Page didn't flinch. He simply called Clapton an old soul stuck in an older time. It wasn't a style debate, it was a duel for the future of rock itself. Clapton clung to blues authenticity, while Page launched music into the cosmos. And with each Zeppelin triumph, Clapton faded further into shadow. This wasn't healthy competition, it was a fixation that consumed Clapton's confidence. Once revered as a god, he was now haunted by the fact that someone else was ascending. But none of this compared to what happened next, the rivalry that didn't bruise Clapton's ego but shattered it completely. Jimi Hendrix's arrival wasn't just a shock, it was an extinction-level event for Clapton's reign. It unfolded one hazy evening in London, 1966, a night that would rewrite music history. Clapton walked in, still king, unaware his throne would vanish before the encore. He had the look, the praise, the nickname that echoed in alleyways. God. But under faint lights, Jimi Hendrix emerged and tore through the fabric of rock. Clapton froze as Hendrix lit up the stage with sorcery, backwards solos, teeth-plucked riffs, flaming tones. It wasn't just music, it was a revolution happening in real time. Eric leaned to a friend and muttered the words that marked his fall. "It's over. I'm finished." A bystander said Clapton walked out pale-faced, defeated by a sound from another universe. Clapton had built his identity on blues mastery, but Hendrix made that sound like a black-and-white film in an age of color. Privately, Clapton became obsessed, studying Hendrix's every move like a man hunting for magic. He tried to mirror the madness, copy the tones, the theatrics, even the attitude. But, to the public, Eric pretended to scoff, labeling Hendrix's sound as chaotic noise. Pete Townshend, another legend, later said it best, Clapton didn't just lose to Hendrix, he couldn't accept it. And instead of confronting it, Eric disappeared from Jimi's shows entirely. Close friends said he'd twist the dial whenever Hendrix's music crackled on the air. This was never a normal rivalry, it was a breakdown of identity. Hendrix hadn't just played better, he'd claimed the future. And Eric Clapton was left staring at a world that had moved on without him. In 1970, when Jimmy passed away unexpectedly, fans everywhere were devastated. Yet Clapton remained eerily quiet. No public words, no emotional statements. He offered only silence. Much later, breaking his silence during a rare confession, Clapton said the unthinkable. He felt relief. There had never been a war of words between them. No interviews, no public shade, but something more insidious lingered beneath. Hendrix didn't just surpass Clapton, he shattered the foundation of what Eric had believed defined him. Even after Hendrix's death, his influence loomed. Clapton could never escape that haunting brilliance. Some rivalries hurt the most, not because of mutual hatred, but because one side never returned the venom. These weren't mere feuds, they mirrored Clapton's deepest doubts, the battles he fought within. Every clash peeled away the armor of his legendary image and exposed his raw humanity. Behind the myth of the guitar god was a man, proud, fragile, constantly fighting his reflection. In truth, the most powerful solos don't rise from perfection, they're born from deep scars. And Clapton's story? It was carved into lost friendships, cutting words, and music forever echoing with unresolved pain.